often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear, all because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Have we trials and temptations? Is there trouble anywhere? We should never be discouraged. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Can we find a friend so faithful, who would all our sorrow share? Jesus knows our every weakness. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Are we weak and heavy laden, cumbered with a load of care? Precious Savior, still our refuge, take it to the Lord in prayer. Do thy friends despise, forsake thee? Take it to the Lord in prayer. In his arms he'll take and shield thee. Thou wilt find a solace there.
Good evening and welcome to A Message of Hope. This is an outreach brought to you by the 70 West Church of Christ, located at 948 Airport Road in Hot Springs, Arkansas. We would love to invite you, if you are a member of our community or if you are visiting or vacationing here, we would love to invite you to be a part of this congregation when she assembles. This is a fantastic group of people and you will certainly be blessed by being with them. This is one of the outreaches that we have as the congregation here in Hot Springs. We also have an outreach known as Manna in the Morning. It's about a 10 or a 15-minute devotional period at 7 a.m. This Message of Hope obviously begins at 7 p.m. There is a Bible study at 7:45 entitled A New Day, A New You with Brother Michael Cox. And one more outreach that we have is the Truth.fm, where you can go on your smart device and download Truth.fm, that particular app. And if you look on that app, you can find the Hot Springs Christian Radio, where you will hear gospel preaching and gospel music 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that is free of charge. Please take the opportunity to download those things, and you'll find several different Christian radios on there. But Hot Springs Christian Radio is the one that is sponsored by the 70 West Church of Christ. We have been studying the idea of faith, and we've really been studying the question, if blank can do it, why can't I? If Noah, if Moses, if Abraham and Sarah, if Barak, if Jericho, or rather the army of Israel, if Rahab, if they all can do it, is it possible for me? According to 1 John chapter 5 and verse 3, God does not command anything of his children that they cannot do. God does not require us to do things that are grievous, that are more than we can bear. As a matter of fact, if you will couple that with 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse number 13, we also find out that in our temptation, God makes a way for us to find and escape. If we will look around, it's there. And so because God does not ask us to do anything that is outrageous, and because he always provides for us a way out, the answer to the question is emphatically, if anyone else can be faithful, then so can I. So tonight, as you and I look into Hebrews chapter 13, we're going to continue to spend our time in verse number 32. In verse number 32, we have studied about Gideon. We studied about Barak, and tonight we're going to look at Samson. In verse 32, it will begin by saying, "What shall I say? Time would fail me to tell of Gideon, of Barak, and of Samson, of Jephthah, of David also, and of Samuel and the prophets." As we look at this laundry list, we kind of begin to see and think that we may know where the Hebrews writer is going. And as those ancient Jews hear that list, they know exactly where he is going. They see the faithfulness in every one of these people, and they understand what this Hebrew writer is telling him without any further explanation. But as you and I look at Samson tonight, I've been looking at Samson and trying to think, how do I put his life into a good light? As we'll explore his life, you're going to see this. You're going to see a man who knew what truth was and seemingly just didn't care. He seemingly wanted to follow after himself. But I need you to know, before we even get started, that Samson is located in Hebrews chapter 11, the Hall of Fame of the faithful, for a reason. He is there, and you and I need to study him. Judges chapter 13, 14, 15, and 16 is where you'll find the account of Samson. Before we get to that account, you and I need to backtrack a little bit and go to Numbers chapter number 6. Because Samson is going to be raised and reared as a Nazarite. And a Nazarite is not the same thing as someone from Nazareth. Sometimes we confuse that. Sometimes we think because they are very similar in the way that they sound that it's the same person. That maybe Samson was from the same place Jesus was. That's not correct. A Nazarite is a vow taken by an Israelite, male or female, and there are certain stipulations within that Nazaritic vow. The vow of the Nazarite first says that the Nazarite will not cut his hair. The Nazarite vow goes on to say he will not eat or drink of anything from the grapevine, that he will not eat, or rather that he will not touch a dead body, so that he will not be unclean. And the length of the vow that was taken would be really set by the person who was taking the vow. And if at any time they violated that vow, let's say they said, I'm going to be a Nazarite for 1 year. And if at any point in time during that year they violated those vows for being a Nazarite, then they had to start all over. Imagine this. Imagine you have taken that Nazarite vow and you have made it 364 days and you have not done anything to violate that vow. And it just so happens that one day out in the street, your foot accidentally rubs up against an animal that has passed away, that has died. You have now touched a dead body. You have now violated your Nazaritic vow. You now start over. These vows were very serious, and the nation of Israel took them very seriously because God expected them to. Well, Samson is going to be a Nazarite from birth. He's going to have those vows placed on him his entire life, and they're placed on there by his mother and his father. God said, your child's going to be a Nazarite from birth. And so he is. Most people think in the very outset of thinking about Samson, they think strong. That's true. Physically, he was very strong. But I want you to see this. He's probably the weakest strong man found in the Bible. when he is confronted with God's word for a majority of the portion of the life of his that we have in Judges chapter 13 through 16. Samson fails. Samson has a problem. Samson's problem is Samson. He has seen himself so much as strong. He has seen himself so much as independent that many times in his life he fails to depend on God. And so let's start in chapter 13. As Samson is introduced to us, we find him first strong-arming his mother and his father into allowing him to marry a woman who is outside of the Jewish religion. It is the case that in 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 1 through 6, God tells the nation of Israel again not to marry women or men outside of the Jewish religion. Matter of fact, in the King James Version, in 1 Kings chapter 11 and verse number 1, you'll read there that Solomon loved many strange women. Now, that has absolutely nothing to do with the oddity they are in their personality. It has everything to do with the fact that they were pagans. He said, once you begin to intermarry and once you begin to fall in love and have eyes for these pagan men and women, they're going to pull you away from me. And as you and I look at Solomon's life, we see that happening time after time after time after time. Samson is not much smarter than Solomon. He sees a very attractive woman who is a pagan, and he says to his mom and dad, that's the one I want to marry. And his father says, can't you find someone else who is Jewish? Can't you find someone else who is of our religion? And he said, nope, that's the one. And the mother and the father of Samson bow to his wishes. Personally, I think that a lot of Samson's problem was in the way that he was raised. It seems like, now we're not told, but it seems like he had a chokehold, a stranglehold on his mother and his father, and he knew which buttons to push to make them do what he wanted them to do. And that's not good. Because the way Samson is going to be portrayed within chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16 is that he's nothing more than a spoiled brat. That's how he's going to be betrayed. And I think that's a proper way that we look at him. Because it's not until the very end where he sees the bigger picture. Well, as we go on with Samson's life, he married the wrong person, which turned out to be detrimental to him. Imagine that. Imagine God being right yet again, and the woman that Samson married was taken back by her father and given to another man. And now there is an outrage from a man who's supposed to be the judge of Israel, from a man who's supposed to have, as we would say back home, good walking around sense. But he proves himself not to have that so much, as he lights the tails of foxes on fire and sends them through the field of his then father-in-law, where it burns down all of his crop. What is Samson doing? He's pitching a fit. That's all he's doing. And he's showing himself once again to be kind of bratty. And so, as you and I move through his life, we see him acting foolishly and showing himself to be a fool or making foolish decisions most of the time. You'll recall that one of the Nazirite vows was that he did not touch an animal that was dead. Except there was the carcass of a dead lion that he found. and that honeybees had made a comb inside that lion. And he reached in there, he got that honeycomb out, and he ate it. He's defiled. He touched a carcass. He's defiled. He's defiled. He had a wife who was a pagan. He was defiled. He did what he wanted to do. He was defiled. And now at this point you're probably thinking, hey, if Samson can live that way, and if he can live in opposition to God, then surely I can too. That's not the lesson. Oh no, that's not the lesson at all. We see Samson, and many times we say that he was married to a woman named Delilah. I can't find anywhere in Scripture where they were married. I think they were just kind of living together and just, kind of doing whatever they wanted to do, living the best life they knew. She was a Philistine. He was an Israelite. They were naturally at war against each other all the time. She was looking for the reason he was so strong, and he gave her 2 or 3 false reasons. And every time she did, the Philistine army would kind of come in and try those things that he would say, and he would wake up, he would break those bonds, and he would kind of whoop everybody in the room. The Bible will tell us in Judges chapter 15 that she vexed his soul. Now, in our vernacular today, we would say that she worried him to death about where his source of strength came from, and he finally told her, "It's my hair." Interestingly, he was also wrong about that. When they came in and cut his hair, his strength did leave, and God took that strength away from him. But his source of strength, we will find out in chapter 16, was and had always been God. That was his source of strength. And he was unaware of that seemingly just as much as anybody else. So they came in, they cut his hair, he became weak as another man, they overthrew him, they took him back to the palace. Now, if you and I are Philistine lords, what would you say you would order to have happen to Samson every day? The Philistine lord there said, pluck out his eyes and string him up, bind him in between 2 pillars of the house so that he can't move. I think if I am that lord, a third directive that I give to the army is, and you shave his head bald every single day. I don't want his hair growing back for fear that he might get a little strength back. Now, we're about to see, and we're about to come upon why it is that Samson is mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11, with all of those who are faithful. The last act of Samson's life. The last act goes against everything you and I know about his life so far. His life so far has been self-centered and selfish and bratty. It has been self-serving and all about Samson, and no one else could be in the room with the ego that Samson had. And now we're about to see a man who is blind, bald, strung between 2 pillars so that he can't pull his arms down to get his strength, who has nothing to offer God. But in chapter 16, after Samson prays to God, God gives him his strength back. Why is that? Why didn't God say, well, you need to learn your lesson. Well, you've been preoccupied with Samson for so long, you need to learn your lesson here, and I'm going to let these Philistines just torture you and kill you. Better yet, why doesn't he say that to me? Why doesn't he say to me, you haven't learned your lesson yet? I'm going to let this world just beat you up and throw you into the corner and see how you like it. I hope he never does. I hope every time I pray to him and every time I repent of my sin, I hope he is faithful and just as he says he is, to forgive me. And if you and I hope and rest on that same hope of God, it's necessary to understand that Samson did the same thing. The God he served is still the God that you and I serve. And here he finds himself strapped to the pillars, blind and bald and strong. I don't have to be told that he repented and turned back to God to understand that he repented and turned back to God. How do you know that, preacher? Well, I know that because the gifts God gave him in that strength came back to him. And God only gives out those gifts when we, the sinner or the child of God who is living in sin, returns home. Notice, if you will, Luke chapter 15, just for a moment. And when he came to himself, this is verse number 17 or so. When he came to himself, he said, how many servants in my father's house have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to rise. I'm going to go to my father's house, and I'm going to say, Father, I have sinned against heaven in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. And you'll recall that young son, as he walks back, that the father sees him a great way off, runs out there, has compassion on him, kisses him, hugs him, and there are three things he says to his servants. He says, bring him a robe, bring him a ring, and bring him some shoes. The father was not willing to give those things to him until he came back. And so is the principle here with Samson. God was willing to take him back. God was willing to see him as his child once again, his faithful child once again, if Samson was willing to come back. And because of the gifts given to him by God, we understand, Samson came back. It is at this point that Samson kills more in this last battle of his life. I do not think that Samson's last hoorah on this earth was a suicide mission at all. I think this was the last battle, and every soldier knows as he goes into battle, he can live or he can die. This is the last battle Samson will have. And in this battle, he kills more of the enemy of God in this one battle than he ever did living as a bratty judge. Here's the lesson to learn from Samson. If Samson can understand and grasp the bigger picture, and if Samson can understand that life is not about him, but all about God, if Samson can be faithful, then so can I. This has been an outreach of the 70 West Church of Christ. May God bless you and keep you.
Jesus, keep me near the cross, there a precious fountain, free to all a healing stream flows from Calvary's mountain. In the cross, be my glory ever, till my raptured soul shall find rest beyond the river.